welcome to Father Spitzer's Universe at the intersection of faith and reason. I'm located right there. I'm Doug Keck, your host here from our studios in Irondale, Alabama, the heart of EWTN, the mothership on Mother Angelica Way. And today's topic, the philosophy of the pro-life movement. And we're talking in anticipation of the big March for Life coming up on this Friday, if you're watching us live. And of course, email us questions at spitzersuniverse@ewtn.com. Post your questions for us on Facebook at facebook.com/EWTN, online hashtag FSUniverse. And you can also send us a tweet via Twitter, twitter.com/EWTN, hashtag FSUniverse as well. Don't forget, for all things Father Spitzer, there's always the Magis Center website, and that's magiscenter.com. And don't forget, upcoming, we have the March for Life, our complete coverage as we do every year, EWTN. Coming up Friday, January 27th, go to EWTN.com/pro-life for all the details on our website. And don't forget, there may be some important people coming this year to the march. We hope there'll be a lot of people there. And so we may see some more coverage on the network. So look for that and hold them accountable on the news. But don't forget, if you want the straight coverage you can rely on from a Catholic perspective, stay with us all day long right here on EWTN. And speaking of staying with us, we've got Father Spitzer out at our West Coast studios in Orange County, California. Of course, from the Christ Cathedral. In the shadow of Disneyland and also the Angels Ballpark out there, talking to him today about the philosophy of the pro-life movement. Great to see you, Father, as always.
Great to see you again, Doug, as always.
Great, and we talked a lot right before the election, going back a few months now, about the pro-life issues and their importance to Catholics, certainly in related to voting. But here, and we've been talking last week, and we've talked about the Eucharist, but this week we're going to be talking about the pro-life movement and how we understand the whole idea of life in the light of the Church. But let's touch base first with a question that came in off of last week's program about the Eucharist. And here we go. Dear Father, regarding last week's episode on the Eucharist, all the other apostles, I guess besides obviously Judas, received communion at the Last Supper, and they later denied their association with Jesus. Can you explain that, please? And I guess the question might be for people. They say, well, you go to communion, here they are with our Lord. They receive the Eucharist directly from him. It's his body, blood, soul, and divinity. And within a short period of time, they're not strong enough to be able to stand up to the questioning as to whether they even knew him. If it's really Jesus, why wouldn't they have had that ability? And even for ourselves in our daily lives, if people say, well, I see you go to communion, you're receiving the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus, and then I see you go out and live a life that's not exemplary at all or reflective of what that should be. How does that work?
Yeah, it's the old problem of free will once again. And of course, God, the Lord is not going to abrogate free will, for any of us, because of course, this is the whole purpose of our lives here on earth, that we have to choose God and choose his way and choose his law. And this is not going to be an easy thing, because there's so many other kind of alternative choices that are very, very, difficult indeed to resist sometimes, because of not only our own internal disposition, but because of the temptations of the evil one. But for all intents and purposes, yes, free will is the intervening factor. And the apostles, God bless them. They had just been through Jesus' crucifixion. I mean, they are, he's being taken, he's being arrested. They obviously, trusted in him, felt that he could, obviously kind of defeat these people if he wanted to, yet he allows himself to be arrested. I think they're completely flummoxed, by almost his passivity in this regard. And suddenly the shepherd, this pillar that's been in the center, of their lives, is suddenly taken from them in the hands of these civil authorities and hostile religious authorities. And I think they're just literally flummoxed. Eucharist, and they are scared. They're scared out of their minds. Here's where the free will comes into being. Yes, I think, that the Eucharist was supporting them, helping them. Jesus' presence within them is bolstering them, but, they just give way, and Jesus even anticipates it in the agony in the garden. He says, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. They do want to be loyal, but they are so scared. He's not around. He always was around. They're afraid for the future. They're completely flummoxed. They don't know why he's allowing himself to be persecuted in this fashion. And all of a sudden, they find themselves, when confronted, hey, aren't you one of them? They do, they go the way of weakness, and they say no. And they protect, as it were, their themselves before, they allow their loyalty to Jesus. And they hadn't even thought probably about martyrdom before. I don't think they had thought about how much trouble they could be in for, associating with Jesus. They just, were completely flummoxed. And that's why they did it. I mean, honestly, I think Jesus was supporting them, bolstering them. But of course, they just, because they're free, because they were, unprepared for the whole event, they wind up, allowing themselves to submit to weakness.
That's
and
interesting.
They submitted to their fears.
I hadn't really thought about the idea that, to some degree, you think about it, they were probably shocked and surprised because they might have been, even though they heard his talk about, it sounded like something was going to go on, they thought this might bring about the kingdom, or that he would then display his divinity in some form, or that he would not allow himself to be taken. And once that didn't happen, then, like you said, they were just kind of probably stunned.
Yeah, I mean, here's the guy who could calm the storm, here's the guy that could master nature. Why aren't you just like wiping these guys out? Why is this happening? And I think they're genuinely flummoxed, totally unprepared, and they submit to weakness.
Right. And next week we'll be talking more about the Eucharist as we continue talking about that. Its importance to us as Catholics, certainly. Let's move on to today's topic about pro-life philosophy, the pro-life movement. And here's an interesting question. It covers a lot of ground, but I think it's good for you, Father. Dear Father Spitzer, can you explain the Catholic Church's view on the theory of evolution? I believe there is a direct link between the theory of evolution and the assault on life. It directly attacks the belief in God, or it seems that the Church is silent on this issue. God bless you. All this is from Kathy. So talking about at least some people's understanding of how evolution is portrayed, which seems to say, well, there really wasn't a God, or if there's a God, he's really not involved, and everything just kind of is a natural process, and that hence it leads us to maybe a demeaning of actually human life.
Yeah. Well, Kathy, first and foremost, the Church has not been silent about evolution at all. In fact, the Church made an official pronouncement called Humani Generis. This was Pope Pius XII, way back in 1951, which permitted Catholics to believe in evolution with one important caveat, that evolutionary theory could not deny that there is a transphysical soul, a unique transphysical soul created by God, given to every human being, making them a unique transphysical, transcendental human being in the image of God. So in other words, what Pope Pius XII was saying is that you cannot reduce human beings to a material, organic, physical being alone. And see, evolution can only cover physical events, right? Organic, biological events. Evolution can't explain the existence of a soul, a transphysical soul. And you might recall that we've talked about near-death experiences and the evidence for a transphysical soul, which is almost overwhelming. 80% of blind people who are blind from birth, see, when they are, clinically dead. And the the only way of explaining that is that you have some kind of soul capable of sight and memory and cognition and hearing and so forth after you've left your physical body. But then the church made another major pronouncement. This is St. John Paul II. He made this in 1968. Now I take that back. In 1989. I hope this is correct. I might be wrong, but anyway, he made a pronouncement to the Pontifical Commission on the Natural Sciences, and that's the a very important, committee. And he said there that evolution now was more than a hypothesis. That it was really a theory which was being validated very much by the science of that day. I think it was 1989. I hope I'm right. Might have been a little later than that. But in any case, he makes that pronouncement and then goes on to say that because of that, Catholics can go ahead and believe in evolution as having a powerful, a kind of scientific background to it, with the the same caveat that we do not deny the existence of a unique transphysical soul created by God, giving them the dignity of God's own, dignity of being made in His image. So we cannot deny that. But aside from that, that's been very, very well taught by the Church. So you can believe in evolution. That's not a problem. The Church does not see it denying God, denying the transcendent, or denying your soul, so long as you affirm what there is very good evidence of in Jesus' resurrection, good evidence from in the near-death experiences we previously discussed, that there really does exist a soul. So you're fine there. I really don't think that evolution has led to the problem with pro-life, this culture of death, as St. John Paul II describes it again and again. I think that goes back to the abrogation of 10 other principles, which we can talk about in this program, but I discussed them in a book called 10 Universal Principles, a brief philosophy of the life issues. And in this book, the 10 principles, the more important ones that we might discuss today, which the Catholic Church, by the way, in many respects is responsible for. I mean, you're going to see St. Augustine all over these principles, St. Thomas Aquinas, Bartolomé de las Casas, Francisco Suarez. These were people who were priests who gave rise to the 10 greatest universal principles, which we have enshrined in our Declaration of Independence and in our Constitution. And those 10 universal principles were seriously abrogated by the Roe versus Wade decision. And by the way, they were also abrogated in the same way by the Dred Scott decision, whereby the Supreme Court of the United States unanimously approved enslaving black people under white people, with the incredible phrase that black people must submit to enslavement by the superior race. This was a unanimous decision by the Supreme Court. It's the same logic, the same problematic forgetfulness of natural rights, and the same logical errors of construing silence in the Constitution to be a denial of personhood and a denial of citizenship. So we'll discuss that more in the program. That's really what has gone wrong. It's a complete failure of the majority of the Supreme Court, but of course that complete failure had a cultural background, as St. John Paul has identified. It's been a long history since the late 1950s of truly abrogating the principle of non-maleficence, the principle of personhood, the principle of inalienable rights.
Well, it's funny that you bring up St. Augustine because somebody had a question related to St. Augustine that ties into what you were just talking about. Their perspective is, Dear Father, I've read that St. Augustine believed that the soul did not enter the body for a number of days after conception. How do we resolve this piece of history with the Church's pro-life views of today? Thank you. This is Thomas from Colorado. So, I mean, we're going back to Augustine. It's a long time ago. So I'm not sure if we should be asking him for medical-related advice, but people bring this up. Sometimes you hear about Thomas Aquinas and quickening, as if the church has different views over the years. So go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about St. Augustine there, but I know St. Thomas Aquinas certainly held that position that, it was after conception that the soul actually entered the body. Now, he had a philosophical view of that, which, we have empirical evidence today that the single-celled, unattached embryo is really a full human being. And the reason we have that evidence is because we know that every human being has what's called mitochondrial DNA. That's the DNA from the Eve gene, right? Our original ancestor, Eve, from 200,000 years ago. And we have that evidence that we still have that DNA in us. Every single person, every single being that has that DNA is a human being by definition, right? They come from the lineage of Adam and Eve. And secondly, we have a full human genome at the single-celled stage. I mean, there can be no doubt that everything required for the human being to develop into a full human person is present at the single-celled stage, attached or unattached. So this essentially was information that St. Thomas Aquinas did not have. He simply didn't know it. He was kind of, speculating when, everything was in place for a full human being to be present. And now we know from genetics, we know from DNA sequencing, we know from the presence of mitochondrial DNA, things that St. Thomas Aquinas didn't know about, that really a full human being is present, and his humanity or her humanity guaranteed by the presence of the mitochondrial DNA, right? Essentially indicating that, there's a full human being there, and if a full human being, then capable of receiving that transphysical soul from God. If St. Thomas Aquinas were alive today, he would have changed his position simply because his own logic would have required it in his theology, and he would have seen the scientific evidence of it, and he would have literally changed it to the position we now hold unanimously within the church.
Right. Okay, very good. Let's move on to our next question. We've got a lot of questions in today's program, so we'll move ahead rather than taking a break. And next up is, science has proven that the human embryo is physically alive. Okay, this is a question comes from Maria. We know that a child's heart can be seen circulating blood in about 22 days after conception. Scientifically and soundly, how else can we argue that life begins at conception? Thank you. So we have certainly now with ultrasound and things, we can see a lot of things we couldn't see and hear before. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think there is even a question that scientifically, Maria, that scientifically that a full human being is present at conception. We know from DNA sequencing, this goes all the way back, to about 1978, that the full human genome is there. Jerome Lejeune testified to this in 2 appellate court decisions. It's unquestionable that the mitochondrial DNA is present. It's unquestionable that this, cell is metabolizing and living. If you allow that cell to live with its full human genome already present, then it is unquestionable that it is a full, unique, human, and only human being. Living human being. No one can deny this. Now, the problem came in with specious argumentation from the Supreme Court's majority in Roe v. Wade, where they made a specious distinction between human beings and persons. So if you go back to the reasoning there in 19b, where the court says, the majority says, that the appellate's case would collapse this if a human personhood could be established, and in fact the appellant has and her lawyers have so much as agreed to this fact. Then, stunningly, the court makes this distinction and says, well, we can't establish the personhood of this full human being. I mean, this is the most specious distinction, right? So in other words, we know there's mitochondrial DNA present. We know there's a full and unique human genome present. We know that it is a living organism, which if allowed to live, will continue to develop into a full human being. We know all of this. Suddenly, the court says we can't establish personhood, which means that the fetus is deserving of protection under the law. Okay. Now, of course, the court, does this in two remarkably specious ways. First of all, prior to the court's remarkable decision, the only time we ever see this kind of argumentation is in the Dred Scott decision, which permits slavery. But what is the whole argument? The argument is an argument from silence. The court says, look, the reason we're so uncertain is because we've looked at the language of the 14th Amendment and we failed to find that prenatal personhood is established. Okay, what does that mean? It means that the 14th Amendment in the Constitution is silent on the personhood of prenatal living human beings with a unique full human genome. That's what they're saying, is it's silent. Now there's a real important dictum in the law, that silence means silence, that you cannot construe silence to mean the affirmative or the negative, because silence says nothing. So it is unfair and it is unjust to ever interpret silence as meaning one or the other. This is a well-known dictum. The court abrogates it, immediately says, because we found no specific mention of prenatal personhood here in the 14th Amendment, therefore it doesn't exist, and it's okay to kill that fetus because we didn't find any evidence to support prenatal personhood. Now, first of all, that is an egregious violation of logic and of legal reasoning 101. But then the court, when you analyze what they have done, they have completely reversed the entire logic of our constitutional system. Instead of saying that the burden is on the courts to prove that a living human being is not a person, in other words, to give evidence that this living, full, unique human being is not a person simply because they are in the womb, in utero, the court suddenly says, no, the burden of proof for us is to establish that the full living human being should be considered a person. In other words, the burden of proof is that they have to meet is a much lesser standard. Now all they have to do is show, that there's some evidence that a full human being should be considered to be a person in the eyes of the law. A much easier standard to meet. Now, if you really look at that, I mean, you could, I could find you a zillion analogies, but let's take a look at the Dred Scott decision, for just a second, which goes ahead and permits slavery of human beings, quote unquote, by the superior race. Unbelievable phrasing, right? And what was the logic there? The court said the same thing. The court said, we've searched the Constitution and we do not see any explicit provision guaranteeing black human beings citizenship according to the Constitution. The Constitution is silent on this. So Dred Scott, right, the unanimous justices say, because the Constitution is silent about proving personhood about proving a citizenship for black human beings, therefore they don't have it. Therefore, the Constitution intended to deny citizenship to black human beings. Then they go on with the same logic. It's up to the court not to prove that black people should not be considered human beings in order to avoid the principle of non-maleficence, right? Doing them an unjust and unnecessary harm. Instead, they say the court is only responsible for proving that black people should be considered should be considered persons and citizens. And we can't do that right now. So go ahead and enslave them. It's okay. We're the superior race anyway.
Would you say in
now,
that situation? Would you say, Father, in that situation, that in both those cases, decisions were driven more by the politics of the day than, you know, what the appropriate legal decision should have been, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, in other words, the abrogations of logic, the abrogation of the principle of non-maleficence, and the shifting of the burden of proof from, you know, a person is, as it were, you know, innocent until proven guilty. Now, every fetus is considered not a human being until proven that it is. In other words, they're guilty until proven innocent. And for all intents and purposes, a complete reversal of the logic that we have within our courts. And the only way you can justify it, right? Because it makes no sense logically, makes no sense ethically, makes no sense in terms of the principle of non-maleficence, avoiding unnecessary and unjust harms, makes absolutely no sense in terms of the burden of proof that we've always established for ourselves, that we always should be responsible for proving that a human being does not have and is not a person or citizen, not that they have to be shown to be one, right? That you prove, you assume guilt before innocence, right? The fact is, what motivation could you have for such specious, unethical argumentation? There's only one reason: politics, convenience, whatever you want to call it. It's a Machiavellian decision made, I shouldn't say this, by some Machiavellian weasels who really did not want to honor the true intention, not only of the founding fathers, but of all the people that go all the way back to Francisco Suarez and go back to, you know, Hugo Grotius, and go back to John Locke, and go back to Thomas Jefferson. I mean, you know, when you look at this, they would be appalled at the complete abrogation of natural rights. They would be completely appalled by interpreting silence to mean an absence of rights. They'd be completely appalled at establishing the burden of proof of showing that somebody should be considered a person who's a full human being rather than not a person, etc. They would be completely appalled. And the Supreme Court has gotten away with it because it was politically expedient. It's a horrible decision. And the precedent that it has established, you can see it's getting multiplied. I mean, this is the kind of precedent being used in active euthanasia and so forth, but I don't want to get off on another subject. But it was certainly, this is the kind of logic that justified slavery. Not surprising, it's justifying abortion.
Euthanasia, all those things cascade together. We're going to take a break and give Father a chance to have a little cup of water there, and we'll see if we can find something else to get you riled up there on the show in the second half as we continue our discussion about something that's incredibly, we're kidding about it, but incredibly important for us as Catholics to understand what the Church teaches in relation to the whole pro-life situation and how it affects our lives, how it affects our church, and certainly look for the March for Life this Friday on EWTN. Stay with us, much more ahead as we continue with Father Spitzer's Universe. Don't leave us. Thanks so much for staying with us here on Father Spitzer's Universe. I'm Doug Keck, your host, with Father Spitzer out in California, talking about the pro-life movement and the Church's position on life. And of course, don't forget EWTN's complete live coverage this Friday from a Catholic perspective of the March for Life. It's going to be a big, big event with some surprise guests we hear. So tune in and check out our website, EWTN.com/pro-life. And you'll find out all the information about all our pro-life programs this month, and especially our coverage coming up this Friday. And we return to Father Spitzer as we continue our conversations about the Church's position on life. Here's a question just came in. More than 1.43 billion babies worldwide since 1980 have been aborted. What happens to all these innocent, immortal souls that only have the stain of original sin? Can they ever get to heaven? Can they be purified in purgatory? After all, their most fundamental right was taken away. Love your program, and this is from Raymond. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe it's Raymond Arroyo. Maybe
good.
Ray heard, was checking in and wanted to throw a curveball at you there, Father. We hear that a lot. People wonder, what is the status of a child like that? I mean, years ago, in some ways, limbo was a place that had been posited, etc., and then people go back and forth to how it would work. Go ahead.
Yeah, for all intents and purposes, those little children are in heaven, no question about it. They are, though they have the stain of original sin. Originally, it was thought that maybe they were put into a separate place called limbo because they had not been baptized. At the Second Vatican Council, that position was actually formally, rescinded. By the way, that was just a theological opinion. Right. That was not a doctrine. Limbo was never a doctrine in the Catholic Church. Right. It's a theological opinion, and that was actually rescinded. And now we hold that those children are, because they are innocent, because they were killed unjustly, they would have the same status as the holy innocents, right, who were slaughtered, because of the arrival of Jesus. And so for all intents and purposes, we believe that every last one of them is with the Lord in heaven, and of course expressing, they are able to express the fullness of who they would have become, because their souls, right, are full human souls, right? So their souls are completely there, and so they're going to be allowed to develop in some way. We don't know how that occurs, whether they experience some kind of childhood in heaven or what, but we know that they will be, all of them, brought into the heavenly kingdom. That, of course, doesn't excuse the fact that we have a moral and ethical obligation to protect those human beings, because that's how God intended, human beings to have the possibility of a biological life with parents and so forth, and not to be killed prematurely. And there's very good reasons for that, but the point is that doesn't excuse anything. But yes, God does, in His unconditionally loving mercy, take them all up to Himself. So what's kind of interesting, is that little kids who have near-death experiences, are little kids who undergo clinical death. So if a child drowns or they have a heart attack or something of that nature, 85% of children have a very positive near-death experience. Only 15% are not able to remember that anything happened to them. It's just the reverse for adults. 80% of adults don't remember anything after clinical death. 20% have a positive near-death experience. So we do know God does very much care about children, not just because of near-death experiences, but because of Jesus' own declaration, right? Beware of what you do to these little kids, right? Because their angels are looking into my heavenly Father's face. So He cares very, very much about them.
Better to have a millstone around your neck, I think, was the maybe reference
exactly.
On that one, right? Well, let me ask you that, because you touched on that, and it's obviously ridiculous, but sometimes when we get into, you hear people, when they try to make it into some degree a religious argument, which they do about abortion and things like that, they say, well, as Father just said, since these children end up going to heaven anyway, so that's a wonderful eternal outcome for them, and this young lady gets to avoid having to deal with this so she can deal with her life better here. Why is that a bad outcome?
Yeah, because it's morally bankrupt. I mean, we are responsible as human beings for a code of just ethical behavior, just in the sense of justice, right? So the very minimum that we are expected to do is to follow what's called the silver rule. The golden rule is a high standard. The silver rule is the minimum ethical standard which is expected of every human being and written into the conscience of every human being. Do not do unto others what you would not have them do unto you. Don't do an unnecessary harm to others that you would not want done to you. In other words, if a harm to another human being is avoidable, right, then avoid it. And if a harm is unavoidable, right, something happens, the economy bottoms out, you have to lay somebody off, you're in an automobile, you can't stop it in time. If a harm is unavoidable, then minimize it. That's our least ethical option. And even brute utilitarians like Thomas Hobbes would say immediately, right? If you're not going to abide by the silver rule, if you're not going to abide by what's called the principle of non-maleficence, don't do unnecessary harms to others, and if a harm is unavoidable, minimize it. If you're not going to abide by that, then life is going to be brutish, ugly, and short. My shorthand way of looking at this is, if you have a friend who says, you know, I really need to do unnecessary harms to people in order to be fulfilled in life. I just need to kill some of my children in order to be fulfilled in life. Run, Bambi, run. Because you're dealing with someone who's devoid of conscience, which psychiatrists call a sociopath.
Right, yeah.
You know, run, Bambi, run.
Right.
Of course we know this. It's written not just into the religious law, it is written, as St. Paul tells us, into our consciences, into our hearts. The whole, you know, our whole legal system is based upon the distinction between malum in se and malum prohibita, right? In other words, that we know the distinction between something that is evil in itself, something which is unjust, something which is unnecessary, something which causes unjust harm. We know this is wrong to do if it's unnecessary. And for all intents and purposes, the law makes no excuse, right? Whether the ignorance is no excuse for the law when you're dealing with malum in se. When something is evil in itself, the law presumes, not the church, the law presumes you have a conscience. The law presumes you must know, and therefore the law presumes that ignorance is no excuse for your not knowing it. You must know it. You're responsible. Now, malum prohibita, like don't go through a red light. Red lights mean to stop. Yes, you would need some education in our culture in order to know something like that. You could be held, you could, be excused from you know, by you're committing that kind of a crime. You could be excused because of ignorance. Right. Ignorance, therefore, is an excuse for not obeying the law with malum prohibita, but not for malum in se.
Right. Well, is that the reason you think, because, like you said, in a sense, it's innate to us, why there's so much anger, at least attached to this issue for some people, certainly on the people who tend to defend the ability to do it? Is that why there's always seems to be such anger involved?
Yeah, I think sometimes when you see a lot of moral indignation and outrage towards something which is completely unethical and wrong, for example, the pro-life people, there is anger there because people really do feel like people should know that, just because a baby is in utero doesn't give you an excuse to kill the baby in utero any more than it would give you an excuse outside the womb to kill that baby. You know, I mean, partial birth abortion is so, you know, exemplifies, you know, the outrage so much that people are just going, how can this be excused? I mean, this is clearly a case of an unjustifiable, unnecessary harm, namely the taking of another human life. How can you possibly justify this under any circumstances simply because the baby is in utero? It makes no sense. And of course, yes, we do get outraged at it, and we got to calm that so we can try and get into people's heads and rationally explain why it is wrong, because our culture has literally planted a seed by giving legal sanction, legal justification to this crime. Now, here's the basic logic that people follow. If something becomes legal, it becomes normal. And if it becomes normal, it becomes moral. Why? If you give something legal sanction, then people will start doing it, feeling that the legal sanction is a moral or ethical sanction. And of course, if they start doing it in great numbers, which they have in the case of abortion, it seems to be moral because everybody's doing it.
Now, let me ask you
this is a big
Let me
problem.
ask you that point, because you point that out. Is that a unique problem kind of to the American mindset, or is that something we've seen around the world and throughout other cultures? What's your thought?
I think it is very, very normal in Western culture, and certainly in some Asian cultures, and certainly in the United States, where the law is so highly respected. Remember, in our culture, the law is associated with justice. It's associated with this high principle. And by the way, it was St. Augustine that did this. It's not because the Roman law was so powerful, right? But because of Augustine's dictum, right? That an unjust law is no law at all. In other words, what Augustine was saying is that every positive law, a positive law is a kind of law that's passed by a legislature, or a kind of law that is becomes a law because of legal precedent, etc. That kind of positive law must always correspond to the higher principle of justice, right? To give every human being their due, to not cause any human being an unnecessary harm, right? This is minimal justice. Now, the whole idea of justice being higher than the law, given to us by St. Augustine, was snapped up in the European world. And of course, because the law was enshrined with a dignity. The law was portrayed with statues of, liberty, or justice, who is wearing a blindfold with the scales and so forth. Right? Justice and the law, right in front of the Supreme Court, you have that very statue of Justice herself, blindfolded with the scales, right, of this idea that justice is the guiding principle of law, a noble thing indeed. And of course, do I think that justice is noble? I do think justice is noble. I think it is, in its enfleshment, in equity, in the whole area of equity and evidence and so forth. I think justice is so noble, it moves my heart, and that's why I allow the law to move my heart. And Augustine saw the same thing too, but he also recognized that if the law does not follow justice, that is to say, if the law abrogates that principle of do no unnecessary harm, the principle of non-maleficence, if it abrogates, the idea of giving every human being what they deserve and are due because of the work or the time spent in the work that they have, done, if the law is going to abrogate justice, then it is no law at all. And of course, as you probably know, I mean, this principle has been used again and again and again in every act of civil disobedience. It was certainly quoted by Thomas Jefferson. years. It was certainly quoted by Martin Luther King in the the Birmingham Letter. It was certainly quoted by Gandhi again and again. I mean, it just comes from St. Augustine. But for all intents purposes, that's why we give the law this powerful moral force within our culture, because we believe it is commensurate and consistent with justice. But in point of fact, if it is not, then that law is not a law. The people who passed that law have abdicated their responsibility of being those who are responsible for justice, and not the arbitrary passage of laws which the powerful or the influential in the culture have pressured the poor justices to uphold. For all intents and purposes, they've abrogated their duty, not just the duty to the people of the United States, not just the duty to the innocents who will be harmed by this abrogation of justice, but their duty to justice itself. I mean, the outrage is so significant. Well, I mean, these guys think that they are simply not morally responsible, and it's just amazing to me that they can sit back and in pretended innocence.
Right. Now, isn't that really, I mean, on one level, isn't that what the Nuremberg trials were all about, which was dealing with people who said, but this is what the law was. I was following the law, and the fact that there's a higher law, you know, that needs to be that supersedes this kind of situation, you know. So let's go on to our next question.
Hermann Goering's great apologetic. This is what we're following in the United States.
Right, exactly. Right, yeah, I just did what I was told, right? The classic concentration camp, I just was following orders kind of approach.
Exactly.
Here's another question, and this kind of expands it out, and to some degree, in a lot of ways, complicates a lot of the things we talk about, even in the abortion thing. We think back several years ago where this issue suddenly got raised up from a political side, and certainly with the HHS mandate has been something of importance as well. This person writes, I don't see how abortion can be completely eradicated as long as artificial birth control is the order of the day. Abortion is built on the mentality of demand for artificial birth control, and this is from Julie. Again, that kind of artificial birth control, which does put you in the position of I'm in control of my body, I'm in control of how these things work, and to some degree abortion is the last version of birth control.
Yeah, well, there's certainly a linkage between the thinking about artificial birth control and abortion. However, when we deal with an ethical issue, I forgot the name of the questioner, but when we deal with an ethical issue, we have to distinguish between the two acts because they are morally very different. To block conception is one thing. To kill a full human being, even if just a single-celled embryo, that could be, with RU248, the morning after pill, that is what's called an abortifacient, and that is a killing. And the same thing holds true for any other, intervention to kill an already formed fetus, a single-celled embryo with a zygote, basically we would call it, that has a full human genome and mitochondrial DNA. So there's two completely, distinct acts here, and one is far more serious than the other. I'm not saying that the contraception is not serious. I'm saying abortion is really, really serious. And so we don't want to make our ethical argument dependent upon the artificial contraception argument. What we want to do is keep the two separate, but in our own mind, looking at the pedagogical side of things, yes, does artificial birth control, does the mentality of it lead to the mentality of abortion? Yes, it does. But boy, you cross a real big, huge threshold when you start the killing activity, and that is the killing of an innocent. And,
of course,
that's a very different matter.
Some people might point out to it, they'll say, well, some of the forms of contraception are abortifacients themselves. So in that case, they kind of already crossed over, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that kind of contraception is not a blocking of conception. That kind is a killing of an embryo or a zygote.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here's another question as we close out, and another aspect of this whole discussion. This person writes to us. This is Meredith from Charlotte, North Carolina. Father, the biggest hurdle to overcome in putting an end to abortion seems to be softening the human heart. How do we reconcile change in the hearts of men and women? What loving steps should we take in transforming our neighbors' hearts so that they may actually choose life? And this is, again, Meredith from Charlotte, North Carolina. Another aspect of it, sometimes we can get ourselves so focused on the argument and the discussion and kind of the tussle that we have to remember that we do need to change people's hearts at the same time.
Yeah. Meredith, I'm just going to recommend this book because it's a big question. But in 10 Universal Principles, at the very end with the 10th principle, I talk about the 4 levels of happiness. And I think, there are a lot of really good human beings out there who really would respond to moving from level 3 to level and from level 2 to level 3 and 4. And what I'm just going to give you the real brief explanation and then talk about the consequences of helping people to make that move, because I think you're right. A softening of the heart is what's required, but we can do this through a kind of logic. And if you look at the 4 levels, level 1 means that I'm finding my happiness and my meaning in life in terms of, physical stimulation and material well-being. So having a Mercedes-Benz with leather upholstery or getting, lots of ice cream cones and bowls of linguine, that is what really is going to make a meaningful and happy life for me. Okay? The second level, and by the way, there are many people who are on that level in our culture. Secondly, there's what's called ego comparative happiness. This is level 2. And what people there say is, so long as I have more success, more intelligence, more, promotions, more power, more control, more achievements than other people, or I'm just in that top 20%, I'm going to be happy and have a meaningful life. But if I don't, then I'm not going to be. Now, the problem with this is it really does push us right to ego comparative problems like jealousy, fear of failure, fear of loss of esteem, meaninglessness, and so forth. And we've talked about the 4 levels of happiness in this program before. Right. But the third level of happiness is where we want to move people is the contributive view of happiness, as you described it through the word love. Yes, a more contributive view. In other words, instead of wanting to be better than everybody with our lives, level 2, or have more creature comforts in our lives, level 1, instead we decide we're going to want to make an optimal positive contribution to somebody or something beyond ourselves. So make an optimal contribution to our families, our friends, our church, the kingdom of God, the society, our workplace, our colleagues, and so forth. We decide we're going to really predicate our lives on making an optimal positive difference to them rather than being better than them or more successful than them, etc. The 4th level of happiness, as you might have guessed, is faith. So that is to say, we're transcendental human beings. We desire perfect truth, love, goodness, beauty, and being. We desire to be in perfect, in harmony with God. I don't know if you're familiar with that gal who just, she was a former atheist, Sally Reedy, who, you can read about her in the website there. She became a Catholic, a Roman Catholic from a former strident atheist. And the reason she did was because she felt completely lonely and sleepless and, anxieties. I mean, the whole Kanita Dervick study, right? Increased, meaninglessness, depression, impulse aggressivity, familial tension, substance abuse, and suicide attempts. For all intents and purposes, she was so lonely for God. And when she submitted to God and accepted Him into her life, she discovered God not only existed, but she discovered He was love. And so she became a Catholic. But the point I'm trying to get to is, yes, we have this extreme, also this other extreme need for, not a transcendental life and a life of faith and a life in communion and harmony with God. Now, the point is, there are techniques that can be used that are explained by this book to help people get out of the who's achieving more, who's achieving less, who's got more power, less power, more control, less control, more intelligence, less intelligence, more athleticism, less athleticism,
Right.
etc. Well, there are techniques in this book that describe how to move people by what they're looking for in their lives, by how they're looking at other human beings, to use these techniques to move them from dominant level 1 and 2 meaning to level 3 and 4
Right.
meaning contributive and faith meanings. And if they do that, yes, everything in this book about the 10 universal principles is just going to become so much more apparent. It'll be just like that atheistic lady in Britain. She just comes around, she goes, I get the whole doctrine of the Catholic Church now.
Right.
Because
It all fits,
she makes
right?
that leap of faith. That's right.
And also,
so,
just before we
that's
go
the-
here, we're
yeah.
just out of time, Father, is
Yeah.
of course our Holy Father in the year we just came out of Mercy. So much of when we talk about things like abortion and things like that, we're talking about healing and being open to people who obviously may have made mistakes in the past in their life, and we should accompany them on the way to finding the truth. And that's what we try and do in this show every week when we visit you in Father Spitzer's universe. Thank you so much, Father. We will see you next week, and we'll be talking to Father, of course, there he is, about the Eucharist again. And don't forget, folks, that as we move ahead, this Friday, we've got the March for Life coming up here on EWTN Friday, January 27th. Go to EWTN.com/pro-life. And there's a whole bunch of details, and there's going to be a lot of people showing up at that march, we hope, and support it. And it's really important for people to pray for those people who are going to be there. And remember, the numbers that really matter are the babies' lives that we need to save. Thank you so much. Join us next time, next week, 5 Pillars of the Spiritual Life, the Eucharist, Part 2, right here on Father Spitzer's Universe. I'm Doug Keck. Till next week, have a good week.